Global markets rocketed higher as US President Donald Trump paused his steep new tariffs hours after they took effect.
Now, Trump has announced a 90-day pause on most of the tariffs for every country except for China. This led to a euphoric Wednesday for Wall Street as US stocks soared to one of their best days in history. The Dow Jones surged 7.9%, while the S&P 500 index rallied 9.5%. The tech-focused Nasdaq Composite Index jumped 12.2%.
Stocks in Asia also rebounded strongly. In Japan, the Nikkei was up 7.2%, while in Seoul, the Kospi was up over 5%. Trump made the surprise announcement on Truth Social that he has authorized a 90-day pause on the higher tariffs, while the baseline 10% tariff would remain.
Trump later told reporters that he had been considering a pause for several days. On Monday, the White House had announced a report that administration was considering such a move, calling it fake news.
But this was something certainly we've been talking about for a period of time, and we decided to pull the trigger. And we did it today, and we're happy about it. I didn't know it would have that kind of an impact, but it's, I think they have the biggest increase in the history of the stock market. That's pretty good.
Trump, however, singled out the world's second biggest economy, that is China, saying that its tariff rate would be raised to 125%. The US president claimed that the reason for punishing tariffs on Beijing was based on the lack of respect.
China wants to make a deal. They just don't know how.
U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent also asserted that the pullback had been the plan all along to bring countries to the bargaining table. He claimed the stock markets did not factor into the president's decision.
We saw the successful negotiating strategy that President Trump implemented a week ago today. It has brought more than 75 countries forward to negotiate. It took great courage for him to stay the course until this moment. And what we have ended up with here, as I told everyone a week ago, they're in this very spot, do not retaliate and you will be rewarded. So every country in the world who wants to come and negotiate, we are willing to hear you. We're going to go down to a 10% baseline tariff for them, and China will be raised to 125 due to their insistence on escalation.
Now, Trump's turnabout, which came less than 24 hours after steep new tariffs kicked in on most trading partners, followed the most intense episode of financial market volatility since the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic. The upheaval erased trillions of dollars from stock markets and led to an unsettling surge in the U.S. government bond yields. And for more on this, the correspondent Susan Tehrani has sent us this report from New York. Listen to this.
President Trump has escalated his trade war with China, imposing a 125% tariff on Chinese goods following China's retaliatory hike of 84%. And while President Trump did implement a 90-day pause on reciprocal tariffs for many countries, China was notably excluded. After this news broke out, billionaire investor Bill Ackman praised the president, calling all of this, quote, brilliantly executed and textbook art of the deal, referring to President Trump's book. Ackman, who had urged President Trump to allow space for these tariffs and negotiations, warned that without a pause, many small businesses could ultimately face bankruptcy. Now, this tariff pause and the announcement also helped ease global market fears. The Dow surged 2,000 points after the announcement. However, it's safe to say that recession fears and concerns loom as the U.S.-China trade standoff intensifies. And what it does is basically exposes economic vulnerabilities. President Trump says that he's confident China will come to the negotiating table. We'll have to wait and see. Susan Tehrani reporting from New York for WION World is One.
All right. Also to discuss this further, we're now being joined by Gaurav Sansawal from Washington, D.C. He is a fellow for the India Chair at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. In his role, he supports chairs commercial and economic engagement with stakeholders in the United States and India. Thank you so much for joining us on World DNA.
Thanks for inviting me.
So let's get right into it. What I want to begin by asking you is, do you reckon that all of this has been premeditated? Of course, we had heard reports earlier as well that there was likely going to be a pause. Those reports were then rubbished. Now there is, in fact, a 90-day pause. What do you think is happening here?
I think all of this makes the policy goal of tariffs fairly clear. And the policy goal here is to bring countries to the negotiating table. And if anything, in the Indian context at least, India began negotiating a bilateral free trade agreement right after Prime Minister Modi's trip to Washington in the early few days of the Trump presidency. And so in some ways, one could say that India was better prepared to handle this than many of the other countries that are now beginning to see what this is all about, which is that the US is trying to correct the imbalances in the overall trade policy, in the trading relationships that US has with other countries. And the way US wants to do it is by gaining leverage over countries through the imposition of tariffs, and then using that as a device to bring countries to the table, to the negotiating table, where there can be some amount of reciprocity. So I think it's fairly safe to say that the policy goal today has become more clear than it ever was, and negotiation is what all of this is aimed at.
Gaurav, as far as China is concerned, clearly they're getting the special treatment from the US. Tariff rates, we heard of 34%, 104%, 125%. Is this a power struggle for Trump at this point, wanting to declare US as the de facto economic leader in the world? Because China is the closest that comes to the US. What's really happening? Why is China getting this kind of treatment?
I think this goes to the heart of the Trump election campaign, and even before that, the trade policy of the last few decades, where there has been this growing realization in the political economy that President Trump represents, which is that a large number of jobs from the US have gone to countries like China in the last few decades. And so that has led to loss of jobs, loss of that relative sense of economic prosperity in certain parts of the U.S. And especially the parts of U.S. which many people don't often get to see, parts beyond the East and the West Coast. And so China's uniquely positioned in that. It enjoys the kind of a relationship where over the last few decades, it's managed to get a larger share of the jobs in the trade pie, if we may say so. And so therefore, today the attempt is to single that out. It's not new. We've seen over the last 10, 15 years a consistent effort by subsequent administrations in the U.S. to get tough on correcting the kind of the improper trade unfair practices that certain countries use in the world. And so I see it as part of a continued trend. It's not a departure from the overall sense of geo-economic competition between China and the US. It's part of the same trend. But of course, it's happening and playing itself out in a fairly dramatic fashion right now. And I think in the next few days, it'll only get more dramatic.
All right. Also, now that there is this 90-day reprieve, what do you think India will be doing or should be doing in this time?
I think India would want to close in that preferential trade agreement deal as fast as it humanly can. There is a deadline of fall, which was given in the joint statement between the two leaders. But I will not be surprised if that happens sooner rather than later, because that is a way to get to the table and lock in some of the benefits. And on the flip side, limit the sort of damage which will happen in certain other sectors. And so I think India will be focused on doing that. Already, we've seen Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal make trips to Washington, and also a delegation from the US visiting New Delhi to negotiate the terms of that agreement. Even in the last few days, when there was imposition of tariffs, we saw that, yes, sectors like gems and jewelry, auto components were negatively impacted from an Indian perspective. But then there were also small opportunities for India in areas like textiles, in areas like energy. And so every crisis is also an opportunity. And for India, the preferential trade agreement is a way to lock in the opportunities and to make the crisis portion more predictable and more balanced. And I think they're fairly advanced in their efforts towards achieving that.
I hear your point. That was Gaurav Sansanwal joining us from Washington, D.C. When it comes to Trump, there's never a dearth of headlines and U-turns. There'll be more to discuss. Thanks so much for joining us on the show, Gaurav.
Thanks so much.